When it was announced that we were getting a new balance patch with version 10.0, I was really excited to do a patch analysis like I did with 9.3. And as fun as that would be, there's a teeny tiny problem. The patch is teeny tiny. With a patch this small, what insight can I give? Oh wow, the new Stamper now has a better matchup into the green Stamper. Wavebreaker is going to still be rubbish, and Toxic Mist got a minor rework that isn't going to change much of anything. This patch has 6 total changes, but 2 of them can be thought as crab nerfs, so you know what? It only has 4 changes. A patch we waited 3 months for has 4 changes. While there is a temptation to give this patch a pass because it released with 30 new kits, if the expectation is that the kits will make the changes needed, why balance anything at all? They didn't have to murder S-Blast this patch, but they did. This patch was very much intended to fix, or rather change the meta in a way that just adding new kits can't. So if they're going to release a new patch, I'm going to look at it. Plus, Splatoon 3 has had a long history of small balance changes. This one may have an excuse, but it still continues the trend. So I'm going to have a go at Splatoon 3's patch 10.0 for being small, but I will happily make fun of many of Splatoon 3's patches for being small. But I want to make it very clear that just like in real life, it's not the size that matters. A patch doesn't need to be big to achieve its goals, so long as it has the right goals. One time a small patch is warranted is when a certain strategy is so strong and so game warping it doesn't have any real counters, where it has no bad matchups, and its worst matchup is against itself. A strategy being this strong is a major issue for the health of the meta, since there won't be any counter strategies, nor will there be any counter strategies for it to counter, which means the meta is just one strategy that you must use if you want to win. There is no diversity, there is no room for creativity, nor is there any room for self-expression. If you're trying to win, you play this one thing, and that's it. Splatoon 3 was actually in this exact same scenario for the first 7 to 8 months of the game. Back then, we were in the dreaded crab meta, a time where every comp had 1 to 3 splashes and 1 to 2 machines. There was some variation in the weapons you played alongside the splashes and machines. You could use Stamper for its high object damage and general OP qualities, Brush and Tetra to get behind the crabs, Chargers to one-shot the crabs, or even Reflux to spam missiles at the crabs. Despite this variation in selection, you'd always run multiple splashes, and the overall strategy was always the same. In a scenario like this, a small patch is really all you need in the short term. Your immediate goal should be to tone back the overwhelming force that is Crab Tank so that a more diverse meta can evolve. You'd want to add or strengthen different forms of counterplay against a special so that actual strategies can emerge, as well as tone back some of its more extreme aspects, so that strategies that don't have access to its specific counters don't immediately get shut down. In the time it took for Crab to get nerfed to the point of being actually balanced, 5 patches were released, and 4 of them were what I'd call small patches. These small patches didn't target Crab in particular, they hardly targeted anything at all. They were just small patches that led to almost no change. Again, it took 5 patches to make Crab balanced. That took 7.5 months. A very long time where the game was left in an unhealthy state. Version 10 is a somewhat similar story. While the meta is not constricted in the same way Crab was constricted in the meta back in the day, there were some issues with a certain style of comp being a little too prevalent. In the Sendoku Season 7 finale, for example, the top comp consisted of Sniper, Slosher, Splash, and S-Blast. Second place played Sniper, Slosher, Splash, and Stoolies. Third place played Sniper, Slosher, Splash, and Splatana Stamper. There's a clear pattern here. And if you want to target something in a small patch, there are some obvious things to hit. Things like the damage of Burst Bomb or the damage of Sniper. Instead, they use this patch to murder S-Blast, which yeah, it's a very, very strong weapon, but that was not why the strategy was so strong. Sure, this specific variation of the comp is weaker now, but there are other just as strong variations out there that will continue S-Blast's legacy. This is a small patch that in the grand scheme of things changed very little, which is not what you want from a small patch. Okay, but nerfing S-Blast wasn't the only thing this patch tried to do. There were attempts at buffs, 2 really interesting ones actually, a buff to Wavebreaker and a mini rework to Toxic Mist. If it's a small patch, you want your changes to count as much as possible. Choosing to buff a sub and special means that only 2 changes will impact 17 different weapons. That's some nice value for money. Some well-placed buffs can add some much needed variation to existing archetypes, as well as maybe even spawn some new ones, if you buff them well enough. I find the fact that they chose to buff Toxic Mist and Wavebreaker in particular to be quite interesting, since they're found on a lot of backlines, a role that for the past year and a half has been occupied by Sniper and basically nothing else. If these buffs are impactful enough, we could see a backline renaissance, and all from 2 buffs. Unfortunately, these changes are never going to do that. Take Wavebreaker, for example. Right now, it's one of the worst specials in the game. Any weapon with Wavebreaker that sees play right now is seeing play in spite of Wavebreaker. not because of it. If you want to buff it in a very small patch, you need something really impactful. Something to make Wavebreaker into a real threat. I don't know, make its waves harder to dodge, make its immediate detection radius larger and track longer. I don't know, something just big enough that you will feel the effects of in every game a Wavebreaker is in. But we didn't get that. Instead, we got a buff to its HP, and better resistance to Spartanas. In all fairness, this is a good buff in a vacuum. It was incredibly dumb that Spartanas could just one-shot Wavebreaker, and this fixes that. The 80 extra HP is also pretty nice, since breaking Wavebreaker is a really punishing form of counterplay. These are nice buffs, but these are nice, incremental buffs. Something you give to a special that is already doing just fine, but just needs that little extra push to make it strong, which Wavebreaker isn't right now. They tried to do something similar with Line Marker back in the day, where they gave it lots of different small incremental buffs to try and push it over the line. But Line Marker is like the worst sub in the game. It needs a little bit more than an incremental buff to push it over that line. It needs something more impactful, but it never got that. It's a similar thing with Toxic Mist. They made it cost a little less, which makes it easier to use, as well as keep main weapon uptime, which is nice, but Toxic Mist is one of the worst subs in the game. It needs something a little bit more impactful than reducing its cost by 5% of your ink tank. Toxic Mist is on a lot of short to mid-range weapons. These weapons are usually in and around the middle of fights, and tend to want something a bit more immediate and impactful from their sub. If you give it something more immediate, like making it paint the floor, or giving it a special effect when you hit a direct, even though it's a small simple change, it could lead to a massive shift in how effective this sub-weapon is, and how often it sees play. Admittedly, these changes to Toxic Mist are a bit difficult to implement. I don't know how the code of the game works, I don't know what their limitations were for creating this balance patch. It might not have been possible to make Toxic Mist paint, and it might not have been possible to give it a special debuff if you hit a direct. That might have just been too much work. But with Wavebreaker, all it needs, in my opinion, is just tweaks to its parameters, just making some numbers a bit bigger or smaller. Again, it's great that they made it tank more, but I think you could make it immortal and it would still be in the bottom half of specials. If you want a small change to Wavebreaker to have a big impact, there are numbers you can change, but somehow they chose the wrong numbers. Again, my issue is not that this patch is small. My issue is that they're making really poor use of what little patch notes we got. I don't want to be too much of a downer though. Patch 10.0 will lead to some massive changes in the meta. Old archetypes will be forever changed and new ones will arise. I expect the meta over the next month to change to something completely unrecognizable to what we had before. My issue with the patch isn't that nothing's going to change. Things obviously will. My issue is just that the balance portion of this patch will have had nothing to do with it. Except S-Blast. That weapon got murdered.